It was the greatest honor any soldier of any level could earn when the Wehrmacht broadcast radio announcements during World War II was praising a small number of troops among the millions serving. Kurt Knispel was the only German tank arm non-commissioned officer whose name was popped up in the Wehrmacht radio communication during the whole war. Historically, there are many famous German tank commanders, but hardly anyone knows the deadliest tank man of the war, and probably of all time. Kurt Knispel's successes were overlooked during the war. He was not promoted and was not showered with medals. Born in the Sudetenland, he was part of the Czech Republic that Hitler had already extorted in 1938. Knispel began his military career as a loader in a Panzer IV, the workhorse of the German Panzerwaffe. His skills in handling the weapon quickly became apparent, but he was distant from the regime and its propaganda. This was probably not due to a solid political worldview, but his human decency made him despise the Nazi state. In addition, he had an innate tendency towards nonconformism. He was different. It started with Knispel's appearance and demeanor. In the few photos of him, he looks more like a mercenary than a model Nazi soldier, often with a cigarette in the corner of his mouth, never freshly washed. The collar of his tunic was twisted, and underneath was a scarf of questionable cleanliness. Even the national eagle on his uniform was tattered. Then there was his trademark. He always wore a kind of goatee and showed off his uncombed, wild hair. At the beginning of 1942, Knispel was trained on the new Tiger I. With the 503rd Heavy Panzer Division, he took part in the Battle of Kursk. In 12 days, he shot down 27 T-34s. The tank's heavy 8-barreled gun and Knispel's talent as a gunner complemented each other. Knispel managed to shoot down a T-34 at a distance of 3 kilometers. One of his commanders, Alfred Rubbel, later said that Knispel never gave up on the battlefield, even under the worst conditions and the most hopeless situation. On several occasions, he covered the retreat of Wehrmacht units with his Tiger I as the only tank. In June 1941, as part of Operation Barbarossa, Nazi Germany invaded Soviet Russia, and the 12th Panzer Division, part of the Wehrmacht's Army Group Center, joined the conflict. By July, still in Soviet territory and with Knispel's Panzer tank damaged beyond repair, his regiment was moved to Army Group North, and the men started out for Leningrad. Knispel and his Panzer IV tank were unexpectedly damaged by a Soviet round. Kurt Knispel remained inside the impact tank as the rest of his crew jumped out. Determined, he peeked through his periscope, spotted, and destroyed the enemy's T-34 tank. It would become the first tank to be destroyed by Knispel's keen eye. After months of fighting, Leningrad remained under Soviet control. During the operation, Panzer Regiment 29 suffered greatly, and the 9th Company was combined with Knispel's 3. Knispel then met Oberstfreiter Alfred Rubbel, a courageous tank commander who became good friends with him. According to Rubbel, Knispel never abandoned his companions, even under the most difficult circumstances. A natural rule breaker. On May 17, 1942, Knispel and his unit returned to Germany. When Rubbel and Knispel arrived in the motherland, they were greeted with a spanking new Panzer IV tank equipped with a long-barreled 75mm cannon. During a brief furlough, the troops discovered that their unit would be assigned to the 3 Abteilung Panzer Regiment 4 of the 13 Panzer Division. While the majority of the newly formed unit was already on its way to Ukraine, Rubbel and Knispel needed a few days to adjust their new vehicle. Then, on their way to their most recent assignment, their train was stopped in Krakow, Poland. Knispel suddenly heard shouts and yelling in Russian and dashed to the site, where he discovered a Soviet prisoner being mistreated and assaulted by a Schutzstaffel soldier. Knispel intervened with a revolver and a wrinkled brow, resulting in an altercation with the SS guard. The outspoken young officer quickly fell out of favor with the German military police and army, and while his commander would consistently defend him during his service, Knispel was frequently refused awards and recognition, let alone advancement in the ranks. The truth is that Knispel was a natural rule breaker. With tattoos, a goatee, longer than allowed hair, and a passionate dislike for injustice, he was more than just another soldier and stood out from the throng. Nonetheless, he was popular among his comrades, and his abilities were unparalleled. Road to Kursk. Knispel and the rest of his regiment arrived in Ukraine on August 4, 1942, to join the Panzer Regiment IV in the Battle of the Caucasus Mountains, a small territory located between the Black and Caspian Seas. During the fighting, Knispel killed 12 additional tanks, finally obtaining official acknowledgement, being promoted to Unteroffizier, and winning the Iron Cross second class. He was also one of the few soldiers who had the opportunity to operate the new Tiger I tanks. After a Christmas break, Knispel was sent to the Schwerpanzer Abteilung 503 Heavy Tank Battalion's 1 Company. Then, in the spring of 1943, Knispel and his new regiment embarked for Operation Citadel in the east. The Battle of Kursk, also known as the Operation, was one of history's largest and most crucial tank fights. One hell of a gunner. On July 5, 1943, Knispel and the Heavy Tank Battalion 503 were entrusted with opening up roadways for the 6th Panzer Division on the right flank of Operation Citadel. They successfully cleared multiple anti-tank positions. Knispel was on a roll. 2 days later, he was able to destroy a Soviet T-34 over a mile away in a single shot, and the following day, he destroyed 7 more, some as far as 1.25 miles. Then, when his unit collided with a Soviet column of 14 tanks, the Germans opened fire and destroyed 11 in minutes. Knispel broke his own record on July 16th, when his platoon was charged with keeping a cavalry brigade from falling into Soviet hands, and he destroyed an enemy tank nearly 3 miles away. For the next several months, the 503 Heavy Tank Battalion saved several German forces from being decimated by the Russians. Knispel was serving as a tank commander in the vicinity of Auschwitz during a night mission when he heard Soviet tanks approaching. Then, when a third Tiger joined the party, chaos ensued. During the commotion, German leaders lighted the sky in an attempt to set the Soviet tanks fire. However, the combat ended when the third Tiger was damaged by a T-34 and Knispel's engine overheated. Knispel ultimately destroyed 27 tanks during the Kursk battle, and for his heroic acts, he was awarded the Iron Cross First Class. The incident that most likely limited his promotion occurred in the winter of 1943. He was returning to the Russian front, having just picked up his Tiger I tank at a training ground in Germany, when he witnessed an SS police officer beating a defenseless Russian prisoner with a rifle butt during a stop at a Krakow rail yard. Knispel jumped off the parked armaments train, punched the Nazi to the ground, and smashed his rifle. It created a situation that extended down the rail line. When the SS attempted to remove him from the train at a later stop, his commander refused to let him be taken and referred the Nazi police to proper use of disciplinary channels within the army. By the time this had worked its way through the interdepartment bureaucracy, Knispel had managed to dispatch 27 Russian T-34 tanks at the Battle of Kursk, and his future was secure. But as far as the Nazi propaganda regime was concerned, it was an indelible blot on his military record. He was the tank's destroyer, the best of all. Knispel had destroyed 80 enemy tanks by the end of September 1943. Knispel and the 34 Tiger tanks of the 503 Heavy Tank Battalion were sent to the armored Kampfgruppe Bake in January, with the mission of liberating men trapped in the Cherkasy pocket. During the mission, the Tiger Force destroyed an amazing 267 Soviet tanks. By spring, Kurt Knispel had destroyed one Soviet tank after another, bringing his total to more than 100 kills. He would therefore be awarded the German Cross in gold. Days before the Allied invasion of Normandy in June 1944, Knispel and his troops returned to Germany, where they would receive brand new King Tiger tanks, and the 503 were promptly dispatched to France to deal with the overwhelming Allied menace. Despite this, he was back on the war in October, and he and his unit were deployed to the outskirts of Skónmedy, Hungary, where he scored his 126th hit. His commander, Hauptmann Dr. Dienst Korber, recommended him for the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, One of 4 times Knispel's superiors did so throughout the war to acknowledge his exceptional courage, situational awareness, and weapon handling abilities. He would never obtain the renowned award, but he would become an Ace of Aces despite not having the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. Fall from grace. By 1945, the German position in the war had deteriorated significantly. In Slovakia and Hungary, the Tigers of the 503 Heavy Tank Battalion suffered greatly, and by April, just 8 of the 34 formidable German tanks remained, including Knispel's. Despite this, he continued to kill people. As the end of the month approached, the remaining members of the 503 were sent to Vlastis, a town between Brno and Vienna, and Knispel was promoted to staff sergeant. A dramatic ending to his story. Shortly before the invasion of Normandy, his division was equipped with the super heavy Tiger II. Just 10 days before the end of the war, Kurt Knispel was killed near Watstis, just 100 kilometers from his hometown. At that time, the 503rd Heavy Panzer Division only had 8 tanks. 6 Soviet AFVs were destroyed in all by the Tiger B heavy tanks during the fighting. The Soviet archive materials also confirm 5 of these knockouts. Knispel knocked out at least 2 of these AFVs. But this time, Knispel was badly hurt. A shell splinter from a Soviet T-34-85 tank from the 3rd Tank Battalion of the 27th Separate Guards Tank Brigade struck the ground adjacent to their Tiger B, according to a surviving crew member, and lodged in Knispel's head. Knispel was wounded in the early morning. Knispel used to fight with his turret hatch open and without wearing his helmet, his head poking out of the hatch in order to orient himself in the darkness. But he couldn't get himself in good position, and then he was gone. For a long time, it was assumed that a Stalin II tank had penetrated the Tiger II's armor and killed the entire crew instantly. But that was not true. The crew was able to disembark. When his body was recovered in 2013, it was found that Knispel was standing in the hatch without a helmet and had been hit in the chest by machine gun fire. While the seriously injured man was being transported, a mine exploded and Knispel was hit in the forehead by shrapnel. Kurt Knispel is remembered as one of the war's most successful ace tankers, having won 126 wins as a gunner and 42 as a tank commander. However, the soldier's name never gained popularity, either because he did not have the opportunity to publish a memoir or because he fought on the wrong side of history. Nevertheless, his skills were the most impeccable.